So good morning to you, Orion. I think it's great to have this talk, just to be sure of the introduction. Orion Hindawi, you're the co-founder and CEO of Tanium.
Yep, that's great.
That's correct. So to make sure that the acquaintance is right, I'm Rob Beijleveld, and I'm the publisher of CIO magazine and the host of CIO TV and many things on the lyrics of CIO and the community here in the Netherlands. So it's great that we have this conversation. Let me start, if I may, that in 2007 you and your father, David, founded Tanium. So if you look back to that, what is the decision? Why did you make that decision?
Sure. So David and I had founded a company called BigFix back in 1997, and we spent 10 years really learning a bit about what enterprises were looking for when it came to managing all of their devices. So, when we started BigFix, there were probably, 10 or 15 companies that we were working with that had 50 or 100,000 devices. And we really learned kind of the complexities of figuring out what they had, where it was, what it was doing, what vulnerabilities it had, how to manage them. And around 2007, we started having customers coming to us telling us that they had a new problem, which was that BigFix let them gather data in days at scales of 50 or 100,000. And their new problem was that between virtualization and cloud and IoT and OT and mobility and all these things that they were going to do, they were planning for millions of assets, and they needed to be able to manage them in seconds. And so I sat down with David and with some of our chief architects at BigFix, and I asked them what we would need to do to be able to drive that kind of visibility and control. And they said we have to start over, that a lot of what we built could never be adapted to a world where there needed to be millions of things managed. So we put some professional management into BigFix. We sat down around a whiteboard and basically decided, if we're going to start from scratch, how can we manage millions or even tens of millions or billions of devices, and how can we do it in real time? And we got really excited about the problem. And so we spent 5 years whiteboarding and building a new architecture, and that was kind of the birth of Tanium.
Right. So if you look back to that 13 years now, and you always talk about journeys, but if I would ask you, what are the milestones in the past 13 years within Tanium and yourself?
Sure. So Tanium had a bit of an interesting start, and when I say that, what I mean is, at the very beginning of the company, we realized that we were going to have to create a completely new approach to gathering data if we wanted to be literally tens of times more scalable than anything else, and literally thousands of times faster than anything else. And so we spent the first 5 years developing, and that's very unusual for a startup. Usually there's this concept of minimum viable product. There are venture capitalists that really want you to move faster. You're supposed to start selling it before it's ready. You're supposed to do all these things. And we had the luxury of actually being able to sit down and think. And I think there are other companies that fit this mold, but I think in Silicon Valley, it's very unusual actually today. So we sat down, we really spent some time thinking, testing, building with our customers. And when I say our customers, there were probably, as I mentioned, 10 or 15 companies when we were working with them at BigFix who were really, really interested in us solving this problem. And so they volunteered that even in alpha, they would work with us, not pay us, but work with us to verify that our assumptions on the way we were going to solve this problem would really work. And so for those first 5 years, we spent a lot of time just really perfecting the architecture, making sure that it was correctly built so that we could build on top of it. And so that was really the first stage. The second stage was, we realized that building a sales force to go and work with companies, like the biggest companies in the world. And at this point, Tanium has the whole US Department of Defense. We have a lot of the largest managed networks in the world, a lot of the largest government institutions in the world. But when we were starting, getting our name out there was going to be a real challenge. So we ended up partnering with McAfee to embed what we did in their product set. So I would say that that was the second stage of Tanium. And it was a very successful partnership. They ended up showing our technology to many customers. We ended up, I think, really helping their customers understand how to secure and manage their environments. And then we moved to the third phase, which was really going and selling Tanium ourselves, building our own sales force, building our own support organization. And we spent the next probably 6 years in that stage. So up until just this year, I would say that was really where Tanium was. And now we're entering a new stage, which is we have some partnerships that I think are really going to transform what we can do for our customers in very positive ways. And each one of these partnerships, I think, brings us toward our customers in different ways. We don't want to have the same partnership 5 times, but we're very excited about using this platform that we've built with all these capabilities to then enable adjacencies to what we do. And I think that's the stage that we're just entering now.
Yep, I've noticed that you've closed a couple of strategic partnerships in the past 12 months. Salesforce, Google. So if you look to that perspective, how does it contribute or benefit your end customer in this case?
So, if you just take a step back and you look at endpoint, which is the market we play in, many of our kind of analyst community say that there are 50 or 100 different areas in endpoint that a customer needs to be able to buy. And the problem is no one can manage 50 or 100 different endpoints. In fact, not only is it incredibly expensive, it ends up being vulnerability in and of itself, that you have 50 different tools, each of which can control every endpoint in your environment. And some of those tools are not themselves secure. So you end up with a situation where you have 50 pathways to infect your endpoints with bad behavior. And many of our customers are starting to realize that because of cost, because of complexity, because of resource consumption, but also because of the actual security of their environment, they need to pull this down to platform. So, if you take a step back and you think about what ServiceNow has been able to do for workflow, or Splunk has been able to do for data, or Palo Alto has done for network, someone needs to do that for endpoint. And we believe that we are really well positioned to do that.
Yep.
Once we've established that, and if we can convince our partners that it's true that we are the platform for endpoint in enterprise, then there are a lot of things they want to do with that data that make customers succeed faster. So if you think about Salesforce, the basis of the partnership that we have there is that the data that we have is very relevant if you want to be able to serve end users in your organization with better support, better IT experience. So allow them to have end user self-service so that when something's going wrong, they can go fix it themselves without having to call IT. To be able to do automation around what we can find and then fix so that you don't have to have a help desk constantly in the middle of the process, but instead it can be automated. There's some really powerful things we can do with Salesforce to help the end user succeed faster. And I'll just point out that in COVID, when you're at home, many cases, when you don't have an IT person who can just come to your desk, it's even more important that the end user experience be fluid, that it not be something that starts and stops and is very kind of herky-jerky. Yep. And so I think, we've targeted our partnership there. And I'll just point out that we're very intentional about the companies that we partner with, because, when we look at Salesforce and we look at how friendly to the end user that company is, I think they've done an incredible job building that brand. Yeah. And as a result, it's a natural partner to work with on that. And Google, on the different side, is probably the company that people trust most to deal with highly scaled data. So, their ability to manage massive amounts of data, I think, is world-class. And if we can work with them on data analytics for our customers, finding outliers, if we can work with them on security events and alerting, I think we can do a best-of-breed solution together. But I think it all starts with the concept that Tanium is the endpoint platform people trust in enterprise. And that allows us to have the presence to be able to go to these companies and form really strategic partnerships, because they would love to help these customers as well.
Yep. Is that a need to have criteria that user friendliness in terms of your collaboration or partnerships together with, for example, Salesforce or Google?
I think that IT has been too unfriendly for too long. And, we have a lot of users in our large enterprises who really struggle to use the tools that IT provides them sometimes when they're not friendly. And so, yes, I think if you look at one of Tanium's real goals here, it's to simplify things like manageability, things like workflows around IT, so that our customers can do it right the first time, so that end users hopefully can have some control over the things you want to give them control over, so that it feels like a more friendly, fluid process instead of this very unfriendly, opaque, confusing process, which I think unfortunately many users feel like IT is that way. And I think if we can get them to feel like it is more friendly, they're more likely to be able to do their job.
Right. So if you look in conjunction with some trends, Orion, for an example, you see, of course, a lot of shifts from on-prem to cloud. You see all kind of discussions regarding multi-clouds, private clouds. You see the discussion about platform economies, right? Mm-hmm. So in that light, in that perspective seen, can we expect another more strategic partnerships to pop up with Tanium in the near future?
Yeah, we haven't announced them, but we've got 3 huge partnerships that are coming down the pipe. And I think that they are in theme exactly with the first 2 that I mentioned. Big areas, and I think you've actually mentioned a few of these. Cloud transformation is a huge thing for many of our customers. And I mean, just candidly, many of our customers don't know how to do it. So you think about a big bank, they've been around for 100 years, they may have 30,000 applications. Just identifying the 200 that are the most critical to the bank, which assets belong to them, how they interface with each other, what performance characteristics they have, what data is in them, what users are using them, what kind of, the contours of the application, and then helping them see what the ROI is to migrate that into cloud so that they can compare and contrast and maybe even see what a few different cloud vendors would cost them with this specific application so that they can make an informed choice, is something our industry has not done a good job with. I mean, to be honest with you, most of our customers are not as cloud adopted as they want to be because they don't know how to answer some of these questions. And so partnerships that focus on that, partnerships that focus on the ability for customers to be able to rationalize down their IT spend by knowing that there are things that they're paying for that they're not using. Yeah. Partnerships that are focused around being able to go and see how users are behaving and make sure that we're conditioning the network and identity so that those things are dealt with correctly based on the user that we're dealing with. There are a lot of really, really strategic companies that I think see Tanium as an opportunity for them to be able to reach that end device more effectively with higher resolution, with data that they trust, and build more into the ecosystem that is automated, responsive, real-time, scaled, instead of slow, instead of manual. And we're really kind of chasing that, absolutely.
No, it's good to understand that that they are in the pipeline, so to speak. But give me a scoop. We need names and numbers.
Unfortunately, big enterprise partnerships are not things that you're allowed to scoop. Look, we're very deliberate about these things for a simple reason, which is our customers are counting on us to get it right. Many of our customers see us as one of the vendors that hopefully they're going to be able to use for the next decade. And, one of the things that in consumer stuff, I think, you can say the next iPhone is going to have this feature and you're not going to get in trouble. But in enterprise, they really want us to be disciplined. And so unfortunately for you, I don't think I'm going to be able to lose my discipline on this subject.
I had to try. Being a former Hyperion Solutions guy, I know the drill, but I had to try, right?
I never blame people for trying. Yeah.
All right. So you aligned it all in terms of the reliability to your customers. So if you took the COVID-19 situation, and you see, of course, that that within COVID-19, you see a lot of companies going or left or right. So if they have a let's say a negative revenue, right, or a minus revenue, then they need to do cost management or cost optimization. If they have a plus, you see them fastening their transformation processes or plans or projects they have in place. So if I ask you that question, so what is Tanium doing in regards to the customers facing COVID-19, so to speak, in both ways, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing both in our customers, definitely. If you look at some of our customers, they're big airlines, big hotel chains, big cruise lines, and COVID is having obviously a disastrous effect on their business. What Tanium's doing for many of these companies is helping them cut cost. So you think about, as you ratchet down your environment, being able to, when a big vendor comes to you and says, I want you to pay for my software, having really high resolution on what you're actually now using, which may be a lot smaller than what you were using 8 months ago, has been a big ROI point for those customers. And then on the flip side, you're absolutely right. We've got customers like some of our big retailers who are, especially online retailers, who are having incredible growth today. And you know, it's interesting, even companies you wouldn't expect, like companies that produce paper goods, are having a really, really good time right now from an economic standpoint. I don't think, by the way, even the companies that are doing the best in this transition, some of the tech companies especially, are enjoying it, because I think it's very painful to watch our customers, some of them, really get hamstrung by this. But you know, I think we're in a position where we can help both sides. And I will tell you, I mean, Tanium, we've always tried to run this company in a disciplined way. I think, again, you know, in the Silicon Valley culture, it's very encouraged to grow at all costs, to go as quickly as you can, get over your skis, you'll correct maybe later. It's not comfortable to run a company like that. And I also don't think it's comfortable to be a customer of a company like that.
No.
And so, you know, what we've realized is our customers are the biggest banks, the biggest retailers, the biggest manufacturers and healthcare companies in the world.
Yep.
And they're counting on us to be thoughtful, to be balanced, to be there when they need us at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, to not be the partying company, but to be the pediment of their architecture that they can trust. And so, you know, I think Tanium, look, in COVID, it didn't really affect us internally very much, in the sense that we've run a profitable, growing business forever. And we plan on continuing to run that. And we've had a lot of, you know, happy customers, I think, who are willing to continue investing in us. But I will say that we've seen a lot of damage in our customers, a lot of damage. And it's very painful to watch. If you're sitting in my seat, where one of the big reasons I keep doing this job is because I really like many of my customers. I think it's important that they succeed. It is very painful to see some of these big airlines brought to their knees.
Yeah, but if you looked at into, let's say, from your personal opinion or your professional opinion as CEO of Tanium, how do you look to the development of let's say, global operating companies really acting on COVID-19, right? So again, you find yourself probably in a situation, do we go faster or fast, right? Or do we go big or big enough, right? In terms of those kind of changes. So what's your personal or professional opinion on that, Orion?
So I'll tell you a couple things that I'm really pretty amazed by. So the first is, you know, when I talk to the CEOs of our customers, and I think many of them right now are trying to figure out where their transformation is going, the number of big companies that believe that they will be almost entirely virtual for a long, long time is shocking. So I was talking to the CEO of a 300-year-old bank recently, and he said that he believes he will have a virtual headquarters going forward. This is a company that had literally millions of square feet in their headquarters, that is, you know, in their headquarters city, that is no longer going to have a headquarters at all, he believes. That all of his people are going to be permitted to work from home who can for the foreseeable future. That they're going to continue doing things like cloud migration at probably 10 times the rate that they were doing it before COVID. That they're going to hire employees thinking thoughtfully about who's going to work well in that virtual world instead of who lives in this city or that city. These are fundamental changes for a company, really fundamental. And in Tanium, we were 70% virtual before COVID. Now we're 100% virtual. For me, it's relatively easy to make that transition because we already had all the architecture to be able to support our thousands of employees who are virtual. Adding another few hundred or thousand isn't a big deal. But for them, watching them go through this transformation, and it's literally in just unbelievable speed compared to the plans that they had over time. And look, they were really candid. Many of the companies that we're talking to believe that they've accelerated 10 or 15 years of development into digital transformation in the span of months. Right. And it's stunning to be able to watch that. It's also, I mean, you have to appreciate how conservative we've all been, because we all thought this would be impossible. If you told me that what I just told you would be true about the bank I was just talking about, in January, I would have told you you're crazy. There's no way that they're going to do what I just described. Yeah. And yet, 300,000 or 400,000 employees are now working from home. They've got laptops for every single person. Their VPN is scaled appropriately. Everything is working virtually. They've reinstituted their whole video conferencing system so that it works at that scale. I mean, what they've done culturally is stunning. And I think that we should take a step back and appreciate the amount of hard work that many of these big companies have done just to stay afloat. It really is amazing.
Right. Well, I think I can add to that at least in the CEO community in the Netherlands, we applauded also the vendors and the suppliers on the fact that they act accordingly and tremendously supportive. So that's in sometimes let's say negative discussions about licensees or roadmaps or whatever. This was, I think, a fine period, but it also steered the discussion, I think, to the right way. So the governance has just changed, right, to make decisions faster. But in this light, how do you see the CIO and the CTO community themselves, right, within your customers are responding? Is that a point of worry, or do they go fast enough, or do they go in reprioritizing their programs, or so? What's your say on that, so to speak, Orion?
Yeah. So, I'll just say two things. One is to close the loop on the previous comment. You're absolutely right. Vendors have to support their customers in times like this. And look, I've gotten calls from CFOs of many of our customers asking for help with payment terms, asking for help with us finding other savings in their environments, asking for free consulting. And I think that companies like ours build our reputations in times like this. So, you think about how a company like IBM in the 80s was able to establish a reputation that you can't lose because they will stand behind you. I don't know that it's true 100% today, but what they were able to do then, where they told customers, we will stand behind you, and they meant it, formed their reputation for decades. And I think that we have an opportunity, and I think the vendor community has an opportunity to really listen to our customers and empathize with them. And in the process, build a trusting relationship, or we can be predatory or ambulance chasing, and we'll be known as the companies that do that forever. And I think that these are the times where you have to really decide what kind of company you want to be as a vendor and how you want to treat your customers. Do you want to treat them as pots of gold that you go in and you try and grab as much as you can, or do you want to build with them their ability to succeed? And they'll remember, I think. Right. So, I'll let you ask your question again, but I really wanted to kind of make sure I said that. So please repeat your question if you could.
Right. Well, I think that in general, what you see happening, of course, is that besides the fact that a board of directors and a board of advisories will steer the change, right, if they have that picture right. But then you, of course, see the tactics and the execution within the CIO and the CTO communities. Are they really doing it? Or are they going for, let's say, the easy stuff? Or are they going a little bit more complex, saying, okay, if I do cost optimization and if I do a restructure, if I do reprioritize my plan and plannings I had, for example, certain go lives, and now is the time to act on that. So what do you see happening within that aspect, within your customers? Or?
Yeah, so we definitely are seeing people who realize this is a time where they can accelerate through plans that they would have loved to push hard before, but in reality were very difficult to do before. So, I mentioned things like cloud transformation. It's a great example of something where everyone's known for a long time, we need to do this. You look at zero trust networking, basically, figuring out a way where what Google invented 10 years ago, they could implement in their environment. There are huge benefits to both of these things. Being able to go and re-platform around things like Windows 10 and being able to get rid of a lot of the legacy that you needed in the past, but you don't need anymore. I mean, antivirus is not something you need to buy anymore. Microsoft provides it to you in a best-of-class solution. And watching customers who are able to shed a lot of this kind of legacy and move forward at light speed compared to where they were before is very satisfying for them and for us. I mean, when we look at cloud just as a microcosm, many of our customers didn't believe, as an example, that they should be using cloud-based Active Directory, that they should be using cloud-based hosted services for storage, that they should be using all of these kind of things that have been around for a while, because change is hard. The business line didn't want disruption. Their people were saying change management needs to be followed. The auditors were really concerned. All these reasons to slow down. And it turns out that in COVID time, everyone's being given a free pass to keep their company alive. And so what they've been able to do, where they said, you know what, we are going to throw away the old way and we're going to move aggressively to the new way, I think is incredibly satisfying. But on the flip side, I will tell you this. I'm good friends with many of our customers, and it's, we don't have zillions of customers. It's one of the luxuries of our business is that we have these big customers and we know them by name and they know us. I've never seen the CIOs and CISOs and VPs of operations and security directors that we work with so stressed. I've never seen it. I've never seen people, because, especially on the security side, what we're seeing is the incidence of attack is ramping up. The amount of attack they're seeing is ramping up. They're under incredible pressure to be able to keep costs normalized, and their people are working from home. Their kids are yelling in their ears. They don't have any way to go into war rooms. They have virtual war rooms instead of, kind of the boiler rooms they're used to. This is an incredibly stressful situation. And, I mentioned that the vendor community, and I think, this is the way we look at this, we need to give them as much help as we can. But even with that, the amount of change they're going through, the amount of pressure they're under to do it quickly and safely, and the amount of attack they're being faced with, this is an incredibly uncomfortable time for many of our customers. Right. And by the way, I just tell you, on the CEO side, I think there are a lot of CEOs who are not sure what's going to happen in the next 6 months. I mean, if you think you're sure about what the economy is going to do in the next 6 months, either you're really, really, really smart, or you're not really tuned in. I mean, there's a lot of variables here in the U.S. and abroad that are very hard to predict. And so I think a lot of the CEOs that we're talking to are asking their leadership to prepare for 20, 30% IT cuts if they have to do that. And preparing for a 20, 30% IT cut is incredibly difficult to do without cutting into muscle, sometimes into bone. So, these people are being asked to do a lot these days.
Yeah, if you put it into perspective, so I agree that a lot of companies are still struggling with what will bring the future, right? So you've got U-shaped scenarios, V-shaped scenarios, W scenarios, all those stuff is at the table. So what do you think then would be perhaps the most biggest challenge for post-COVID? So let's assume that by the end of 2021, we will get a little bit more, let's say, our arms around the fact that this is a changing economy, changing dynamics, changing product life cycles, changing, etc., etc. So what will be then the biggest challenge in your opinion post-COVID. So I think still today is, it's a kind of a safe situation. We are in COVID, so we're still inventing, reinventing, and whatever, right? With all the scenarios at the table. But what's next, right?
Yep. So when we look at the kind of changes that we're seeing, I think, I mean, I'll just take a couple examples. Commercial real estate. So commercial real estate is a massive part of our economy. I don't think that half of the commercial real estate in San Francisco is going to be occupied in 3 years. And the reason I say that is most of my friends who are CEOs in San Francisco are looking at ways to massively reduce what they're planning on putting people in the middle of cities. New York has the same problem. I think most big cities have the same problem. You look at retail, and I think a lot of people have realized they don't enjoy going to the store. I think COVID has forced people to realize that there's another alternative that they can use to be able to get their groceries. And you look at the US in particular, we have 3 or 4 times more retail space per person than Germany, as an example. And being able to take literally hundreds of millions of square feet of space and reuse them is an opportunity. But in the short term, it's very fragmented. You think about branches for banks. Many of our customers have huge branch networks. It's questionable whether people need or want to go to a branch going forward when they've gotten used in the last year to not having to do that. And so you look at COVID and post-COVID, I think the biggest thing that is going to change in post-COVID is COVID forced us to do things differently. And what a lot of people are realizing is they like the new way better, which I think is going to be incredibly destructive to things that we've done for hundreds of years in our country, in your country, kind of across the globe. People are realizing that the internet changed the way you can do very fundamental things in your life. And I mean, look, many of our customers, there's this concept that in every big city, we should put salespeople because we have customers in those big cities. And we can travel into their offices and we can meet with them and they can convene a meeting of 10 people. And that's how we can explain to them what we do. Most of our customers are not in the city. When I say customers, I don't mean the companies. I mean the people. They're not in the city they were in a year ago. They may be in their vacation house right now working. Some of them are not coming back to the office. How do you sell? How do you support? How do you do basic things in life? I think many of these things are going to change. And fundamentally, persistently, like permanently, they're going to change.
Right.
And so, you look at car companies. A lot of cars are sold because people have to commute.
Yeah.
If a lot of people are not commuting anymore, and that's a steady state reality,
yeah.
How many roads do we need? How many cars do we need? How many gas stations do we need? This is really fundamental stuff.
Right.
And I think that people may be underestimating at some level the persistence of the changes that have occurred in the last 6 months, and how many people are actually looking at them and saying, you know what, look, COVID is a disaster. There's no question about it. It's really unbelievable when we think about things like 9/11, which was so formative for America. And you look at the number of deaths there, you look at the number of it's tragic, but this is also incredibly tragic. But it's also, I think, showing people some of the mistakes that we used to make that we didn't realize were mistakes from the standpoint of productivity, from the standpoint of deadweight loss, essentially, from an economic term, things we were doing that we just don't have to do anymore.
I think that the idea people are grasping more and more that the world, in both in economic perspective as a society, will largely digitize and virtualize, right?
Yep.
On the other hand, you discussed already you see the movement from going from security to risk to liability. And I think that next level of liability is also expected, that how more you digitize and virtualize there, you come into in a different state of mind as a company, I guess, right? You already had about the attacks. So I think the necessary for platforms, both technology-wise and economic-wise, will be enlarged. So how does this will play in your advantage in terms of your vision and mission, Orion, and perhaps your roadmap thoughts about that, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if you look at our customers, I can't think of one that can stay in business without their network and their ability to operate that network well being solid. So, rewind 20 or 30 years, there were companies that made truck engines that thought that their network was a fun thing that was nice to have. There were companies that, were doing healthcare, and the doctors were very comfortable writing things down on paper. They went into filing cabinets. The network was not that critical, or they were going and hiving devices into little firewalled areas, and they were using the network there, but they felt safe. Today, there is no company we talk to that can operate without their network being secure and high fidelity and operational. They just can't work. And what I think we're seeing through COVID is just an acceleration of that. So, things that used to be done in person now can't be done in person. You look at telemedicine, you look at the way that people are doing manufacturing, where there are very few people in the factory by necessity. In the end of the day, I think we're going to end up in a situation where the network is the key to every single one of our customers being able to operate, period. And so what does it do? It raises the opportunity for us to help them. It raises the urgency that they need to be able to operate and manage and secure well. What I think it's also going to do is it's going to increase the scale of what they're managing massively. So you look at a factory that really needs to be more automated because of COVID or whatever else, because of efficiency, productivity. Well, that means a lot more sensors. That means a lot more machines controlling robots that are going and doing things like building cars. And we need to provide a management framework that allows them to operate those things safely and effectively. And I think, just microcosm, you look at our healthcare customers, huge explosions in IoT in the hospital because it's a very powerful capability for them, but they need to manage it, they need to secure it. And so, in each one of these examples, what I would say is, I think COVID accelerated it, but I think it was already happening.
Right.
They need the ability.
If you put it into the question, and I don't want to make a kind of a discussion about territory, but I'm just curious, if you look to the differences of, let's say, North America and Europe, do you see differences in that deployment of and the development in?
We do. So look, I mean, I think that there are countries that are very concerned, and I actually think that this is very legitimate, about the impact that automation has on their workforce. So you look at the US, and there are a few other countries that I would say are similar. Productivity and kind of unfettered capitalism is the rule. And as a result of that, we're seeing a lot of discontinuities today in the US. I mean, you think about 4 million truck drivers. In 5 years, trucks will be fully automated. It's impossible to see a situation where that is not a productivity benefit, where capitalism will not drive that change. And as a result, 4 million people will not have their jobs. Taxi drivers. We look at factory workers. We look at accountants. Like, a lot of these jobs, technology has the ability to disrupt them very quickly. And I think what we are seeing in Europe is more awareness of the societal impact that that kind of dislocation could have. I think that a lot of the manufacturers, and I think that, you look at the works councils and the structures that have been built in Europe to do this, they have to spend some time thinking about what this is going to do to their workforce and to the society at large. And I will tell you, and there was, a big, I think it was Business Roundtable kind of discussion about this recently, but the US firms are starting to wake up to the reality that we have an obligation to the society around us to be healthy for society, not just for shareholders.
Right.
And I would say that that's probably the biggest difference today, is that many of our European companies already act that way. And I think that the US companies are going to have to start acting that way, or I think there's going to be a fundamental breakdown. You can't have 30 or 40 million people over the next 10 years be automated out of jobs and not have a structural problem in society. And I think, you know, Europe is ahead of us on that discussion.
Well, it's good to hear you talk about this, and let me phrase that by, let's say, the word of ethics, right? So I think you tell that also compellingness. So that's great, Orion. But if you also put it from a Tanium perspective in, let's say, your product development, and I can understand that, for an example, security on endpoint protection, and especially in mobile and IoT, will be massive, right?
Yep.
Perhaps even the differentiator of that ethic discussion also maybe, right?
Look, I will say this. I think that if you look at the obligation of companies to do a great job with security, it is more fundamental than their bottom line. I mean, if you look at our customers, we have all 10 of the top 10 banks using our software. If these people are not able to secure their environments, maybe it'll be really annoying for their shareholders. It can also be super destructive to our way of life. You look at the departments of defense in a lot of the friendly countries, they use Tanium on every single asset they have. Those people protect my children. And it's an obligation for them, not just because of bottom line, and in the case of DoD, obviously it's not bottom line, but it's an obligation for them to do a good job of security and operations. And this is one of the things that I explain to my people all the time. We are not in this because we think that we can convince investors to give us more money per share. If that's why you work at Tanium, I think you're missing the point. We're in this because I think what we do is fundamentally important to our way of life. That when you go to a gas station, I want you to be able to use a credit card. When you go to a retail store, I want you to be able to buy something and know that it actually is going to arrive because that company actually has a network that works. And I would love to be able to pivot the conversation in a lot of companies like ours to, you know, instead of how do we get this fundraising round, how do we, you know, get more, and how does the CEO make more money? We have an opportunity as a tech industry to transform our world in a positive way. And I don't see that conversation honestly happening in a lot of companies, but it's a great way to motivate your people to do great work. I also think it's just a much better way to go to sleep at night. Wake up in the morning, know that you've got a positive impact on the world instead of you're just, you know, moving money around so that, you know, you can go and make value for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that it is a really important discussion that companies need to have more and more, and that I think customers of ours expect us to have. And when you talk about the ethics of running a company like this, that's, in my mind, the moral obligation, is to make the world safer so that everybody can be able to do the things that make them happy.
Right.
And I'll tell you, yes, you mentioned IoT and mobility, and like, these are new, super interesting problems because the scale that we're going to be operating at is massive. And the change is going to be massive.
Yep.
And if we can keep the lens on how do we make society better for the people who live in it, instead of, and I know this sounds utopian, but it really does work. If you can really convince your company we're doing something critically important, they will do better work.
Right.
They will commit more heavily to the company. They will commit to your customers. They will drive change that's positive without being able to be stopped because they know it's important to them and their children. And I don't mean because of their paycheck. I mean because of the way we live in this world. And that's, you know,
Yep.
I wish that our company always remembered that. And I also wish that our industry was more honest about this and more attuned.
Well, I really appreciate that you mentioned it, because I think that indeed, besides opportunity within the tech industry, it should also go about obligations within the tech industry, right? Especially if you take not the dimension economy, but the dimension society. So
Yep.
I fully agree with you. So being 20 years in business, Orion, just look for the next 10 years. So besides what you just explained, and I compliment you with that. So what will the next 10 years for you make it tick, right? For you?
So somebody asked me,
technology drivers, is that the perhaps can we go as deep that we really get some more quality in life because of technology? Is that, I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll tell you where I hope we go. Maybe I'll start there. I think that what we're doing today with machine learning as an industry, what we're doing today with automation, what we're doing today with things like autonomous driving will free up literally, potentially hundreds of millions of people from what they're doing today, where we can have machines doing what they're doing today. And I think the big question for the next 10 years is how do we give those people purpose and meaning in our society, and then expecting that 5 years later, there'll be another few 100 million people in the world that fit into that category. How do we transition from being a world where most people either are trying to get food or trying to get shelter or are going into a job 9 to 5 every day stamping things, to a society where that's not necessary anymore, and yet is rewarding and fulfilling? I think, if I look from 50,000 feet, that's the big question that I think we as a society have to answer. And in the US, we've been talking about universal basic income. We've been talking about a bunch of different ways to give people money who are not working. That's not actually solving the more fundamental question, which is giving meaning to people's lives. And I think that's probably the biggest question that I would ask in the next 10 years. From the standpoint of, closer to home to what we do, look, when I look at our customers, many of them are realizing that they're way behind on building the IT capabilities they feel like they're going to need for the next 10 years. So you think about the answer I just gave you, there may be hundreds of millions of people over the next 10 years who are freed up from their jobs. What that means is that automation is going to have to happen, and it's going to have to be very reliable for people to be able to, as companies, trust that their business is now migrated into the hands of machines. And that means management, security, that means a much higher standard of being able to operate these things where they don't fail. And I think a lot of IT teams are trying to build capabilities. I think a lot of countries are trying to build capabilities from the standpoint of education, from the standpoint of workforce planning, to get behind this transformation. But I think it's very hard. It turns out that there aren't enough people who know how to do this. And it's going to be, I think, a global competition, by the way, for talent. I think that countries are going to spend a lot of time thinking about how they can get the smartest people from other countries to come to them because they need them. And it's interesting to watch kind of the argument between we don't want any immigration and we need every smart person in the world to come here, and where that shakes out. So should be interesting.
I think it's a hugely interesting period of time we are into, and besides the fact also that IT has been a promise for over 20 years, but suddenly it feels now that it's coming to all together, right? So that's also a positive aspect, I guess.
Look, as long as we as a society use this as a positive instrument of change, then I think it's going to be great. Look, it's very rare to see a movie where the machines are very important and everything went right. It's I think there are many ways where this can go wrong, and I think we need to spend some time thinking about the ethical and moral obligation we have.
Right.
Because I do think there are a lot of people in our industry who are still focused on how do I make as many dollars in as short amount of time as possible, and are able in their own mind to compartmentalize away the moral and ethical obligations. And look, different people have different perspectives on this, but when I look at social networks, look, I don't have a Facebook account. Most of my friends who are running tech companies, if they have one, they're using it essentially as a marketing tool. They're not using it for themselves. Most of the people I know running these social networks don't let their kids touch them.
No.
They're the new cigarettes of our industry. And just brutally honestly, I don't think that a lot of people are thinking about the impacts that they're having on society when they're doing these things. I think they're thinking about the money they can make.
Yep.
And I really hope that I and the people I care about don't fall into that trap, because I think it's an ugly way to live.
Orion, it was a pleasure to have this conversation together. Thank you very much. And just to finish off, two final questions. One question I will ask you after this interview. The last question for now is, so please take the stage, so to speak, to address to your customers in the Netherlands and say, hey guys, what is the call to action you think is essential for them?
So if I were going to look at the big companies in the Netherlands, I think it's a very similar answer to the rest of our customers. I think the next few years have the potential to be very challenging years. And I think that the last 9 months have woken people up to the reality that this is a very kind of difficult time to predict. What we can do and what I think they need to do is spend a lot of time getting efficiency and consistency in the processes that they have, especially around security and operations, because these are things that you need to be able to count on. And you know, the bigger you get, the more machines you have, the more devices you have, the more data you have, the harder this problem gets. And I think that there's an opportunity right now to think about what platforms you can really trust, what architectures you can implement that have the highest likelihood of supporting you during change. And I don't think it's ever going to get easier than today to make those changes. I think we're in a time where there's never a good time. But you know, Tanium is very excited, I think, to work with the large customers in the Netherlands and globally on giving them architectures that they can really trust. And I don't think it's easy. And I'll just tell you, I know it's not easy because we've been through this transition with many companies, but I think it's necessary and I think it's the right time for us to do it together.
Right. Again, thank you for your openness. And I really appreciated that we could have this call, this interview together, Orion. So I would still ask you a question, but I will do that afterwards. But for now, I would say, do my regards to your father, David, and I'm looking forward to see and speak to you again.
As am I. Thank you very much for the interview.